So welcome to our Everything Marketplaces workshop today, which is going to be on marketplace monetization. So I'm excited to have Adi Thakur join us today, who's a past group chat guest, so some of you might know him. But if not, he has some really great marketplace experience leading monetization at Facebook Marketplace, TikTok, and now at Poshmark. So Adi is going to be leading the workshop where we'll be starting off by covering some of the main ways that marketplaces monetize, looking at lots of examples, covering some of the specific considerations when doing so, and even providing you with a framework that you can use for monetization. So as a quick note on the format before we jump into things, our workshops are once again 20 to 25-minute presentations followed by a group Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the workshop, you can just post them in the Zoom chat. Then just be sure to use the Zoom raise hand functionality and also turn on your camera if you don't mind. So that way we know to call on you when we get to the group Q&A. So with that said, thanks again for joining us here today, Adi. And I'll actually just let you start off with a brief intro and I'll take it over from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, anywhere you are. I'm Adi Thakur. I'll be talking about marketplace monetization. This is my second time doing this with this community. Some quick background. So I've been in this space for a minute. I have worked with several marketplaces, including Facebook Marketplace, TikTok's creator platform, and currently in Poshmark, which is a C2C fashion resale marketplace. My roles have changed quite a bit over time, from building seller-side tools to working on ads for marketplaces and a slew of other things. What I have today is some content that I've observed in my time building products in this space, but also from the public domain. So the idea here is to kind of share my thoughts and insights, and hopefully that'll trigger some questions that are pertinent to your endeavors as well. So with that, I'm going to jump into content, and I look forward to the Q&A that's going to ensue in 20 or 30 minutes. All right, you guys can all see my screen, yes? Thumbs up? All right, cool. All right, so let me just start off with the lay of the land for today. So I'm going to go through a quick industry scan of how marketplaces monetize in general using take rates and take rate boosters. I'm going to introduce you to a framework that you might have seen in the community. I'm going to share some examples from the market. There's different types of platforms that have different treatments to pricing and take rates. I'll go through some considerations on how you might consider pricing your marketplace with a take rate or add-on fees, and even how you might consider increasing your take rate or having a promotional take rate for a time-bounded period. And then, and then I've got some other follow-up reading that you might want to look at after the session. So, this deck's always changing. So sometimes I use the word fee, commission, and take rate. They're all the same thing. So I think I'm going to try and use take rate as much as I can. All right, cool. So let me get started with this framework for monetizing your marketplace. In general, I think everyone's trying to grow GMV or gross merchandise volume or bookings volume or service volume. Take rate is sort of the core price that is charged by the platform. That's the stuff in the green. So take rate is a percentage of the order value, typically charged on the seller side. This is the most common model, as you see on eBay, Etsy, Airbnb, Rover, Uber Eats, etc. And this fee is mostly for aggregating buyers and demand for sellers and other services like cancellations and payment processing, etc. Still staying on the left, there's also some marketplaces that charge a buyer side fee in addition to the seller side fee. Most common are, I would say, in service-oriented platforms, such as Upwork and Fiverr, which is labor. I know Airbnb and VRBO both have a consumer side fee. So does Vinted, which is apparel resale. It's kind of an outlier because most fashion platforms have a seller side fee. Moving to the right, in the orange, what I have is what I call take rate boosters. Typically, these are introduced by a marketplace when they're more mature in its scale. Most common, you'll see seller marketing tools like advertising tools. eBay, Etsy, DoorDash have a bunch of these that basically are tools that help sellers pay for distribution and get placements on top of search or in their personalized feeds or in consumer feeds. What has also become fairly common is subscription services. eBay has got a storage product for their premium sellers that has some premium tools and offerings. And many of you may have used a buyer side services on either DashPass on DoorDash, Uber One, and Amazon Prime. I think most of you know that one. Other take rate boosters might be more relevant to the industry that the marketplace is in. I know that SitterCity offers a background check as a premium add-on service, so that's something that's just bespoke to the nature of the needs of the consumer or the seller on that platform. And then on the advertising front, in addition to seller tools, a lot of platforms also use third-party advertising to boost their take rate and revenue. So overall, this is sort of a fairly generic framework that I think can be pressure tested and sort of fit across a number of marketplace types. So moving on to the next slide, I think this is a bit redundant, but just hit over the key points again. I think the main point over here is at the bottom, which is the net revenue for a marketplace is its take rate times the GMV, which is a transacted commerce value on the platform, plus any additional revenue that comes from take rate boosters that typically come when the marketplace scales to a certain size, minus any adjustments that come from cancellations, fraud, and returns. And I've got some perspectives in here later that will talk about timing on take rate boosters as well, based on company size and maturity. All right, so this is sort of a sampled scan of different marketplaces out there. I won't go through all of these, but I want to just point out a couple of themes over here. So let's start with food delivery. I think we have Uber Eats and DoorDash. Many of you in the States might have used these services. I think what you'll find is that take rates and fees in a particular industry tend to cluster, right? Because it's usually the same seller that is multi-tenanting or offering their products and services through multiple platforms. It's pretty common with Uber and Lyft, Uber Eats and DoorDash, Airbnb, and VRBO, for example. So I think point number one is if you thematically in most industries, you'll see a clustering of take rates and sort of fee structures. I think point number two is once many of these marketplaces achieve scale, so let's take Uber Eats and DoorDash, they have advertising products, which are take rate boosters. And this is a more unique to the food delivery area because it is a three-sided market with very thin gross margins. So advertising is a gross margin and contribution margin booster. And it also provides a helpful utility for sellers and merchants. And they also have other services like I think Uber's got Uber One that gives you free delivery and special pricing. And DoorDash has got its DashPass service, which I use. So another example we can pull here is travel. If you look at Airbnb and VRBO, hosts, they have a host fee of around 10 to 12%. Again, pretty similar, pretty clustered. And then there's a buyer side fee, which is a convenience fee that they charge guests. So very, very similar. I have not seen any other additional take rate boosters in that space. And then I'm going to scroll down. If you're going to go down to the care vertical, there's a Rover and care.com. So this is an interesting space. There's a 20% take rate for the caregiver, the dog walker or the dog sitter. And there's also a 11% buyer side fee. And typically when the marketplace is kind of supply constrained, there's not too many dog sitters out there. I think in most large metros, I think the marketplace feels comfortable charging a fee to the consumer as well. And there's not too much competition. I mean, I don't know of any big competitor to Rover, for pet owners, right? So they have some market power over there to charge that fee. Care.com is interesting. There's no fee for sellers, no fee for buyers. That is sort of a take on the transaction. but they have a subscription for both caregivers and care seekers. And my thesis here is that this is a unique space where this intermediation is very high, because once you find a caregiver for a loved one, you're likely to just sort of cut a deal with them outside the platform. So in that case, sort of tying pricing to transaction volume is just not viable for the business, and hence they've come up with this model. I looked up Sitter City, similar model, similar space. It goes back to my earlier point that price structures, their value and structure tends to cluster together in competitive marketplaces. Cool. So I think those are the main takeaways, and then you can read this at your convenience after. I did a bunch of scans of all the apps that I've used that are marketplaces, and I found a bunch of stuff. Some of these are also sort of screen grabs from the public domain. So take rate seller side example. I pulled examples from a driver screenshot, so you can see, their pricing is transparent. The 20% ish rake is taken off of the top line ride gross earnings. Similar for Rover on the right, they have a clear statement for a dog sitter that says you'll keep 80% of your earnings. So this is the supply side view of the take rate that we just talked about. Take rate on the buyer side is a kind of screenshots from my experience with Upwork. There's the 3% fee that I talked about, plus a fixed payment processing fee. Again, it's just kind of, I'd say, very unique to the labor and service marketplace vertical. Take rate boosters. So these are a big deal I'd say in commerce marketplaces and also in three-sided marketplaces where margins tend to be tight. So DoorDash offers a bunch of promotion tools to its restaurants and merchants in general. They have coupon tools. They have an ads product that they offer. eBay has got a promoted listing service, which is a non-trivial amount of their total revenue, and I have a slide on that later. eBay and Etsy both have had flat GMV over the last couple of years, but their overall revenue has been growing thanks to some of these take rate boosters that they had invested in the last 5 to 10 years. Subscriptions on the buyer side for power buyers. So if you are a consumer with heavy use of a product, Uber One has a product for you. Same thing with Coinbase as well. They have a zero trading fee product with extra analytics and tax filing help for $29 a month. So these are just examples that you can probably experience yourself, but I'm just tying the slide that I shared with some examples. So key point over here around take rate boosters, and then I'll contextualize take rate boosters for startup founders shortly after this. So I've not updated this slide to eBay's Q4 23 earnings. Apologies, but this is what I saw in 2022. I think the point still holds. Is if you look at GMV was 18.4 billion, they, based on their take rate, which is between 5 and 13%, they have transactional revenue, which was around 2 billion in that quarter. And then they had revenue from their advertising service, which is a take rate booster, the marketing tool for their sellers, at around 320 million. So that's an additional equivalent of 200 bips or basis points to their effective take rate, which is revenue divided by GMV. So this is how marketplaces, when they mature, when they probably are not growing as well, they introduce these booster services to increase revenue. I think this slide is a timeline of eBay from founding, going public, to launching its boosters. And I think the point over here is that the boosters came significantly later when they were at scale. eBay was the $4 billion GMV company when they IPO'd, give or take. They were at around 80 billion in 2015 when they launched their advertising service for sellers. And then they launched a bunch of other stuff like eBay Authenticate and a store subscription that came later. So key takeaway, focus on scaling the marketplace, buyer-seller success. The optimizations come later. Yeah, and I think this slide is basically the same point here, right? So I think as a founder, early stage, especially, I think you want to focus on number one is buyer seller value, kind of making sure that you're creating enough value for both sides of the market, for buyers and for sellers. Clearly understanding for buyers and for sellers which segments your product market fit, who are the sticky sellers that are retentive, that keep coming back. You want the metrics you want to track are buyer retention, seller retention, and sort of making sure that your cohorts are retaining at least at around 20, 30% plus at month one, month two, since after you acquired them. I think this is the sort of the foundational validation that you're creating value for the marketplace. And then, very clear North Star metric. And you can be intentional about it being orders or bookings, or it could be GMV or gross bookings value. And there's some trade-offs in picking one or the other, which we can chat about later as well if there's interest. Then I think once you figure out product market fit on both sides, you got to figure out a sustainable growth model. And this is becoming especially challenging in this environment with the paid channels becoming more expensive. So you ideally want to put more money behind the audience where your product market fits. So you don't have a leaky bucket on both sides of the market, right? And you want to figure out your acquisition economics and things like your LTV to CAC ratio, your payback periods. And you also want to invest in SEO and make sure that you're creating high frequency behavior so you get more direct traffic to offset some of the customer acquisition costs or CACs, which have been exacerbated with AT&T, not AT&T, after the IDFA changes from Apple. It's made it really hard for Meta, Pinterest, others to have high fidelity targeting audiences like they used to pre-IDFA changes. And then in terms of growth, once you figure out the economics on both sides of the market, I think it's important to have a cadence to acquire, retain, and bring back lapsed users to both sides. You want to make sure you stack your cohorts over time to maximize LTV over CAC. So ideally, you should be retaining a significant percentage of acquired cohorts so that you're stacking your older cohorts as you acquire new sellers or buyers on both sides of the market. And then once you figured that out, you've brought in buyers and sellers economically, and they are sticky and they keep coming back. You want to optimize matching, right? You want to make sure you get your new buyers and sellers to their aha moment, which would be the activation moment. So you want your new demand setter buyers making their first offer or sending a message to a caregiver, for example, or ordering their first ride if you're Uber. And then sellers getting their first sale, for example, or their first booking as the dog sitter, if you're on Rover. And then you want to make sure that your matching mechanics, your algorithms are efficient, which would mean that you want to maximize. The metric that is quite common and popular is maximizing a number of successful searches. So number of searches that lead to a meaningful interaction on a listing, or maybe even lower funnel, like somebody makes an offer or somebody contacts a caregiver, for example. So anyway, I think long story short, optimization is great, but you got to focus on the core business first, because your take rate boosters are an attached business to GMV, and GMV is sort of liquidity, a measure of marketplace liquidity. All right. I'm going to go into considerations, and these are fairly broad, and these sort of considerations apply to most industries. So question number one is, what side of the marketplace should you monetize? Generally, where more value is being created, it's typically the seller side, because they want distro, they want a payment processing mechanism, they want protection against fraud and cancellations, for example. And it's hard to do most of these on your own unless you're willing to invest in marketing dollars and build a payment system, or have a team that's going to manage fraud. Number two is, how much should you charge, right? So I think, as indicated by the clustering of fee structure and fee numbers that you saw, look at your competitors, right? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but that should sort of give you some guardrails that you can operate around in terms of the optimal take rate or fee for your marketplace at the stage that you're at. The other thing that I think, and this was Mike's example actually, so props to him over here, is you need to consider the value being created versus the incumbents or status quo. So the take rate on StockX versus the eBay take rate is different, and StockX is premium sneakers, so they charge a premium because they authenticate every item that gets transacted and provides that assurance to the buyer that stuff they buy on the platform is genuine, right? So there's a delta in the price because there's a delta in the value that's being given to the consumer. And then also industry margins. I mean, different products on a cross category platform like eBay have different margins. So eBay has got a fairly complicated commission structure, I'd say, that depends on the category. And they've priced their take rate for jewelry and watches, which is luxury fashion, with higher margins at 15%. And it's 3% for commercial equipment. So again, it kind of takes into account the margins that make a sale possible or even viable for a seller in that category. Next up is structure, right? I mean, should it be complicated like in eBay's case where they have take rates per category, they have a 30-cent per order fee, and then they have an insertion fee for large volume sellers? Or Poshmark, where I currently work, where it's very simple and transparent, which is 20% for all categories, all geos, includes payment processing, shipping, listing, etc. Right? So this is a trade-off. I would say, generally at the outset, you want to make your fee as transparent and non-complicated as possible, especially when you have fairly limited categories. I think there's some optics benefit into having eBay's fee structure where it seems a bit lower than it actually is, because when you add it all up, I think it's quite comparable to other marketplaces in that space when you compare it with similar categories. And then I think charging a take rate, if you are a startup, you want to charge a take rate at the outset, can be lower than you'd want it to be at scale, but it's not viable, I think, to bootstrap a marketplace that does not have a fee and then introduce a fee later. More on that in the next few slides. So having a low take rate, it could be used as an incentive. Typically, this incentive could be to cold start your platform, and it needs to be low enough to incentivize supply to multi-tenant with an incumbent or move over their inventory or services. So low is a consideration, low is an option. Maybe you could have a no take rate policy, but it should be time bound, in my opinion. For example, it could be a short-term promo. I think this is what Whatnot did on their fee-free Friday, which was on Black Friday. I think live shopping was 0% commission for 24 hours. And I think that drove a lot of traffic and a lot of sellers hosting live streams. I'd say longer term take rate could be low, but never zero, in my opinion. I think because you want to avoid hooking buyers and sellers to a price that's not going to work for your business. It won't be viable long term. And you want them to have skin in the game and be willing to pay you for the value that you are creating for them: distribution, fraud protection, payment processing. And from an engineering standpoint, I think from a platform standpoint, you do want to build the mechanisms at the outset to process payments, to have sellers, get their earnings out via payouts, versus doing this as an after the fact when the marketplace has started to scale. The other consideration that's not on the slide is if you are a platform like, let's say like care.com, where you can have an alternate pricing model like a subscription due to the risk of disintermediation. So I think that's the other point that's not on the slide. All right. Pivoting to changing your take rate. So yes, you can, but it needs to be thought through. I've seen many instances where within companies where it's been considered and been modeled out, but there's a lot of, but I think leaders have paused because there's massive implications to making price changes. I think number one is hopefully your product is sticky. You reached PMF on the seller and buyer side. There will be some seller community backlash because you're going to have a bunch of power sellers that are super sticky, that are making substantial earnings on your platforms. Any price increase, and again, I think changing here on this slide implies an increase. So you want to model out the implications. What's the business upside? How much additional revenue will you generate from increasing the take rate? Will there be trade-offs in terms of GMV? Because it's possible that you may actually take more from commerce, but overall GMV may flatten or decline. And will that cause any loss in sellers and as a consequence, listings on the supply side? I think you need to prepare for backlash. There's always backlash. I have a Etsy case study on the following slide that I'll share. And then also think about the two-sided effects, right? Does a pricing change impact listing behavior across price tiers and categories? And then what is the two-sided effect in terms of your changing supply mix to the buyer side? Again, I mean, not all startups have an economist on staff. Large companies do. But even intuitively, if you could just think through these things and consider them, I think it's worth the thought exercise with your co-founder or your founding team or investors as well. And then the other consideration is many marketplaces tend to have the power law play out on the supply side. You have a core bunch of really powerful sellers that are driving most of a GMV. Do they have options, right? In dog sitting and dog care, there's not too many options. So I think, they could maybe, I'm not track the changes that Rover's had, but consider your competition and then keep that in mind as well. All right, so I have an example here with Etsy that's made a couple of fee changes over the year. So I'd say Etsy is pretty unique. There's not too much competition out there. I think, handmade crafts can be sold on eBay, but I think consumers and buyers come to Etsy to actually buy a lot of unique items that you can't find in commercial retail. So Etsy, really solid IPO, 2.4 billion GMV in 2015. Their selling fee was 3% on the seller side. And this went up to 5% in 2018. And there was massive uproar, like they had expected. So I've a snippet up there from USA Today that says, Etsy fee increase frustrates some shop owners, say they'll look for new platforms, but there's not too many other platforms that can help them sell, right? And they did okay, actually, that year. Their GMV grew 18%. Their revenue grew much faster because of the selling fee increase. They took more from GMV. 2022, another fee increase from 5% to 6.5%. And there was a strike, and there was pandemonium, and there were threats. And their you can see their revenue increased 10%. Their GMV did soften, right? I'm not going to attribute this to the fee change because this is post-COVID. So I think there was a universal decline in just e-commerce post-COVID. So again, this is I think the key point over here is that I think there will be backlash from the community, whether they will leave the platform or not is TBD. Some can be just empty threats, but there is a trade-off in general between monetization and GMV. Right, as you take more from the seller or the buyer, I mean, it's like pricing, right? I mean, microeconomics, when you increase prices, like, demand decreases. So same thing's going to play out over here as well. So you got to be very mindful and thoughtful of the give and take with the take rate. Okay, I think this slide is a bit redundant, so I'm just going to quickly skim through this. I think the main point over here is focus on GMV growth, your key metrics. Liquidity is key for marketplaces, and then you can monetize once you have scale. Great. Okay, so this is another case study. I've done a deeper dive on marketplaces with substantial ads businesses. And because the ads business tends to be one of the largest take rate boosters. This is sort of a scan at when businesses launched, when marketplaces launched their ads business. I think the key takeaway here is there are some marketplace categories like DoorDash and Instacart, the three-sided ones, that have really tight margins per transaction, and their contribution margin is super narrow. So they need to offset that with some advertising businesses. And I think the nature of the consumers and sellers on these platforms makes ads a very viable take rate booster as well. For someone like, I don't know, like a let's say your Cheerios, right? And the ROI on your ad spend is significantly better putting it on an Instacart or a DoorDash than having ads on TV, because your ads can be attributed to a purchase based on a consumer's buying behavior with transaction data that's shared not with the advertiser, but the ads investment is more closed loop when you're advertising on a DoorDash, on an Instacart versus on TV. So it's actually opened up a new advertising channel that's more measurable for a lot of CPG or FMCG, like we say outside the US, brands over here. So it's kind of a win-win, both for the marketplace and also for the brands that can now advertise en masse in a very measurable way. And as you can see, the gross profit on an eBay or Etsy, which is a two-sided marketplace with a diversity of listing types versus a DoorDash and Instacart, huge difference. And the percentage of ads revenue of the overall business is significantly higher over here. Etsy is an exception because they have a pretty low take rate of around 6.5%. Cool. Just a quick note here, and I'm going to pause and pass it over to Mike, is B2B marketplaces is something that might require some unique treatment. I think the key difference about a B2B marketplace versus a B2C or a C2C marketplace is the sophistication of the buyers and sellers on a platform of this type, right? So typically, you will have higher concentration, so lower fragmentation. The AOV is going to be significantly higher than a consumer purchase on, say, an eBay or an Etsy. And their pain points and needs are pretty unique, right? They may need cash flow to run their business and need for business tools like a CRM or a cloud ERP system, or even insurance and things like that. So the implications for the marketplace is to actually keep those needs, desires, and problems in mind for both sides of the market, and offer, I guess, tools that can justify the take rate that they want to charge. So typically, lower take rate is what we've seen so far with the B2B compared to C2C or B2C marketplaces. There's a higher risk of disintermediation if there's not enough utility and value being provided to both the buying and the selling side. And there's a case to be made for special tools and services. Okay, last slide here. So let's look at FAIR really quick. So just to make the point on special tools for sophisticated sellers, What they offer is analytics, order management, CRM tools, marketing tools, and pre-negotiated shipping rates. And this would be very hard for a small, medium business to do independently. So they will have to integrate these tools. They may need to negotiate pricing for each of these with different vendors. So it's just, it's possible, but it might not be viable for a small business to do this on their own. And then in terms of monetization, they have a 15% commission on all orders. And they have a very favorable payment process so that a small, medium business can manage their cash better. So I think that's all I had. I know that's been a lot. So I'm going to pause now. And Mike, I'm going to kick this over to you. And hopefully we can get some questions from the folks on the call.
Yeah, no, this is super helpful. So thanks for walking us through it. I know it's nuanced, but you definitely did a great job kind of breaking it down for us. So appreciate it. So we're going to jump into questions here, as I mentioned. So be sure to use the Zoom raise hand functionality. That way we know we can call on you and come on. But hey, Audie, I actually had someone that sent me a message. They wanted me to ask for them, which is, how do you think about kind of monetization, maybe specifically take rate with lower frequency, higher AOV kind of marketplaces? Maybe such as in the kind of real estate or housing markets.
So lower frequency, higher AOV, right? Yeah. So I think this sort of goes back to the acquisition economics, right? So I think a take rate that's low is always better, but can you run the business at the current take rate, right? So I would say bring it down to a point on the curve where the acquisition economics start to make sense, right? For you to either reinvest in growth or invest in the business, right? So I think I'd have to look at this in terms of the actual case over here, but I'd say the constraint that you have is you don't want to be in a situation where your payback period on that low take rate, on that high AOV is so far out that you're burning money to acquire the next cohort of buyers or sellers.
Awesome. Yeah, that's gonna be super helpful. So I appreciate it. So, cool. So now we have some hands raised. Hey, Dimitri, do you want to come on?
I have a question about two strategies that I kind of didn't see mentioned in your presentation. One is data monetization. Maybe if your marketplace generates valuable data, selling it to your own suppliers or maybe external parties. And the second is kind of dual modes. Oftentimes you see like platforms like Amazon is probably the most recent example of producing their own products to sell alongside their kind of marketplace suppliers. What do you think of those strategies? Have you seen them work? Have you seen them fail? And kind of what's the right time to think about when to do it?
Yeah, so I think in terms of data monetization, I think the closest thing that I've actually worked on and seen closely is third-party advertising. So you're not actually selling the data, but you're using your data stays within with you, but you can use a clean room so that you can have third-party advertisers target the right consumers based on their targeting audience interests, right? So that's the closest I've seen. Also, yeah, I think that's pretty common. So that's number one. I think number two, in terms of carrying first-party inventory like Amazon does, I think it kind of goes down to what kind of marketplace you want to be philosophically, right? Do you want to carry inventory or not? A lot of marketplaces do not want to carry inventory. They want to basically be a zero inventory business, right? And keep it off of their balance sheet. So I'd say it's a function of maturity would be my guess and my judgment. I think Amazon leveraged the transaction data and the consumption patterns that they saw, and maybe even gaps between supply and demand to say, hey, here's a gap that's, that probably is not served in the market. Let me build something that is equivalent or better, or maybe the same thing at a lower price to increase liquidity in that space. So I'd say you should have enough competitive advantage to have a point of view on what you want to build yourself. And then two, financially, do you want to carry inventory because you're going to lock up cash flow in having that on your books versus just having it sort of not on your books, I guess.
Thank you.
Hey, Amal, do you want to come on?
Yeah. With respect to something like advertising, surely if you can show a return on advertising to your customers, why would you wait? Obviously, there's arguments for getting big in scale, but if you're getting those numbers and you're hitting them, surely that's additive to you and additive to them. And there'd be no reason to wait.
Yeah. So, great question. So there's a trade-off. So I've been building out products for for over 10 years now, both in social and in marketplaces. And I think there is utility on the seller side, no doubt. If you can hit the ROAS numbers that make the seller keep coming back to advertise, perfect. The challenge comes on the buyer side because you are inevitably to promote a lot of the listings that are advertised. Like, you'll bump them to the top of search or your feed. You are displacing an organic unit that may have converted via a transaction, right? So the trade-off is not binary. The trade-off is more nuanced because when you have an advertising product in-house, for example, right, only a small percentage of sellers and listings will be advertised at any point of time. So the liquidity and the search matching is not going to be as powerful as pulling from the entire index of products. So there's a trade-off on click-through rate. There's a trade-off on conversion rate. There's a trade-off on GMV. So buyers that see ads will not convert as well, but then that gets offset with advertising revenue. And that was a bit of kind of ramble there, but I hope that makes a point. So yes, you're completely right. There's no time bound, but generally you want to have very high participation in the ads program so you can maintain a pretty solid consumer buyer side experience and really understand the trade-off between lost GMV revenue and net gain from advertising revenue.
Hey, Anne, you had a really good question as far as variable take rates. Do you want to come on and ask?
Sure. Hi, Addie. Thank you so much. I have a fashion marketplace and wanted to know how you think about variable or custom take rates on the supply side. I have made concessions where I project a higher volume potential and fear churn and backlash as brands talk to each other. And how would you recommend maybe shifting to a tiered approach by volume for higher volume, basically lower take rates?
Right. So is the current approach, is it flat currently across price points, across listing prices and brands?
No, I have a flat rate like starting point. Right. And then we negotiate. We basically don't want to walk a brand if we see a lot of volume potential and our rates are too high. So then we'll make an exception. And now the rates are kind of all over the place.
I see. Gotcha. I don't have an off-the-cuff response here, but I'm happy to chat with you offline.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, Kenny, do you want to come on?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Adi, for the great presentation. You had a pretty strong conviction about focusing on GMV initially and not adding take rate boosters until later in the journey. And I was just wondering if we could dive into that a little more tactically, like what's the right way to think about when you start to add those things and really focusing in on potentially a shift in pressure to become profitable, whether that be from the market or decisions on how to capitalize the business. Is that a time when you start saying, okay, let's still focus on GMV and maybe just raise standard take rate? Or how do you think about raising take rate versus adding boosters if there's a mounting pressure to become profitable earlier than expected?
Yeah, great question, right? So I think the difference, a take rate booster is definitely less sensitive than changing your take rate, basically increasing your take rate. Because you're actually building products for maybe typically the boosters are for your power sellers or power buyers, right? So you're not levying this tax across the entire economy that you're building, right? So in general, I would look at a booster first, and but the booster has to be based on a strategic advantage the platform has and a problem or need that exists with some or even a small segment of sellers that can drive sufficient usage of the tool you're building that will drive meaningful GMV or revenue that makes it worth building. So everyone starts with ads because for sellers, because there's inevitably this power law that I mentioned. You have these sticky power sellers that are running a side gig or a business on the platform, and they want an advantage which may have dwindled as the platform grows, right? You have more types of sellers, and this is more volume of sellers. So their distro on search and the feed gets diminished over time. And many of them know, typically power sellers know the economics of their business better than a casual seller. So they already know the ROS that they need to make marketing viable. So I guess long story short is a booster makes more sense, not a take rate increase. You can do the take rate increase, but it just needs a lot of modeling and guessing, and which may not be viable at the startup stage. In terms of the booster, whether it's marketing platform, it's a subscription service, I think you really want to have your product management hat on and say, hey, what's a core problem here that needs to be solved? Do I have product market fit? And I've been through this process many times over with many companies where even though it's a monetization product, it always starts with user value and the TAM and the opportunity size to see if it's going to make a dent on your business. So again, it's a very long-winded response. Hopefully that's helpful, but I don't think timing is a concern. I think the only thing is, I think the question that was asked earlier is when you introduce ads, ad relevance becomes super, super important on the buyer side because you did not want to cannibalize. There will be some cannibalization. However, it's more nuanced because you want to cannibalize enough where the net revenue from advertising is a net positive for the marketplace. So you cannibalize less revenue, but you make up that with ad revenue and some more.
Great last question. Well, we're out of time here, but yeah, thanks for taking the time to join us here, Audie. This is, I mean, incredibly helpful workshop, and you definitely helped us kind of walk through a nuanced topic and break it down in an easier way to understand, and also how it applies to our marketplaces and a lot of earlier stage marketplaces with the framework as well. So appreciate it once again for the awesome workshop, Audie, and thanks everyone for joining in.